and welcome to Booklust. I'm your host, Nancy Pearl. My guest today is Seattle native Thomas Kohnstamm, and we're going to be talking about his brand new book, Supersonic. Thomas, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a true honor.
Your first novel, which was Lake City, was, could you say, contained by that neighborhood? A place where you grew up and you know intimately?
I think there was one scene that took place in Green Lake, if I remember correctly. But yes, it was very grounded in that neighborhood and also very contained. It took place over the winter break from college, so essentially the holidays, and it was kind of a claustrophobic fit where the protagonist was also isolated in many ways from the outside world. It was set in the early 2000s. He didn't have a cell phone, didn't really have a way to communicate out beyond the neighborhood. So it was all a very contained story, yes.
Yeah. And so you might have had a touch of claustrophobia yourself by the time the book was done, because in your second book, you widened the camera angle a lot. Talk about that. What led to that?
Well, I actually started this book at my initial toehold for Supersonic was a smaller story about stay-at-home parents in a power struggle in a PTA. It started in this sort of like smaller comedic story, and then it just started growing and mushrooming in my mind and became more of an attempt to write a creation myth about Seattle, a wide angled new take on what, all the different components that went into cultural and historical components that went into making this place. And I just started adding one story after the next, and then putting them all together. And the book now takes place in the 1860s, 1890s, 1950s, 1970s, and 2010s, and covers four families over 150 years of Seattle history.
Did you do a lot of research for this?
I did. And I did different types of research. I did quite a bit of reading. I was born and raised in Seattle, and still, my wife and I bought the house that I grew up in off of my folks when they retired. So this was where my brother's drum set was, where I'm speaking to you from right now. So I have a lot of lived experience, but the really lucky or fortunate scenario was that just with deep roots in Seattle, I have a lot of friends, family friends, acquaintances who had lived experiences in other areas beyond my own. So I was able to speak directly with people who worked at Boeing during the Supersonic project in the 60s, other family friends who were born in Japanese incarceration in the Pacific Northwest, and was just had very direct access. I spoke also with Duwamish Tribal Services, who put me in contact with a number of different people with expertise. And so I just feel very fortunate that I was able to do a lot of my research from direct conversations with people with lived experience.
Yeah, and I think the reader will see that in the book because these people. One of the things, for example, that I was really struck by, I've read a lot of early Seattle history and the white settlers coming, which is covered, which you talk about in your book. But the white settlers are referred to by the Duwamish tribe, for example, as the Bostons. And I thought that was just fascinating. Do you remember where that came from?
I believe that I first saw that in a couple of books that I was reading, but then I also worked closely with David Berge, who is a historian. You're probably familiar with him,
Mm-hmm.
and he was very, very generous with his time, and he was actually referred to me originally from Duwamish Tribal Services as the unofficial official historian of the tribe, and he really helped me to. At many points, I would ask him, like, how would somebody refer to X? How would somebody refer to Z? And it was things like, how would you refer to these other people? But also, would you say, would the character say that was a few years ago, or is the character not thinking necessarily in yearly calendar, and would that be
Right.
4 summers ago or 4 winters ago? So there was a lot of just trying to understand worldview, and some of those details came out of that. I do, though, in writing the book, I also, it being a novel and being a novel with comedic element to it also, I wanted to hold this vision of Seattle. I wanted it to be accurate on one level, but I also wanted to hold it at arm's length. So I was thinking very much while I was writing it in terms of like how New York was to the Royal Tenenbaums. It's this sort of spirit version of the place, but it's also, I didn't want to be completely beholden to, did that happen in May 1971 or December of
Right.
1971?
Right.
So I wanted a little
Right.
room for play and to try to, well, at many points I'm dealing with very serious material. I wanted it also to have a fun, engaging element in it and be able to play with some of the advantages of working in fiction.
Yeah, and also working with such a big canvas of people. I know from personal experience that any novel is difficult to write, but when I was reading Supersonic, it just struck me over again and again how much fun you must have had spending time with these characters. Is that a fair assessment?
It is a fair assessment. I would be exaggerating if I said every moment of writing a 400-page book was
Right.
fun. It's definitely rolling a boulder up a hill at points, but I did really, um, and I think I always try to aim to fall in love with my characters, or at least empathize with them. Even the ones that are not intended to be likable, you want to, because we're also channeling something from inside of ourselves in that process. It's all almost a performative process in writing the book. And yeah, I wanted to just explore different parts of different emotional points. And it's kind of like being an actor a little bit, an actor with no
Hmm.
audience at the time. You're just sitting there, you and
Right.
your keyboard. But yeah, I enjoyed, and it's really, I think, fulfilling to write characters who aren't variations of me. I think one of the big leaps between Lake City and Supersonic, while the protagonist of Lake City was in certain ways kind of a shitty guy, at least until he makes his turn at the end. It started with some auto fictional elements and maybe my like worst insecurities about myself taken to an extreme. It's a very bad, what if my life went in this direction? Whereas in this book, there's no character who is particularly Thomas like. And there's just a, I think that empathetic process of writing characters different from yourself is freeing. It's not just fun, but it's therapeutic in certain ways too. Just to start to explore further into the variety of ways to live life and ways to be.
Yeah, it's like a gift that novelists have because you do get to say like, oh, what would my life have been if I had opened the first pot shop in Seattle? Which one of your characters, which your character Bruce does. I know that your first book was a travel book.
Yeah,
A-
yeah.
And I thought also when I was reading Supersonic that in some ways this is a travel guide, right?
Yeah, that's a very good insight. I think I came up as a travel writer during my 20s. I started actually writing phrase books. I've a very kind of atypical path into writing fiction, but or like an organic growth as a writer. I started languages, writing phrase books for Lonely Planet in the late 1990s. Then I became a travel writer. But I started to become frustrated as a travel writer, feeling like my first book was originally titled, it was sold as The Parachute Artist. The name was changed, and I don't like the new name, but changed during the publication process. But parachute artist was an industry term for people who are thrown into a situation and have to figure it out and come up with some, polished copy at the end of that, if you will. And so I started to become very frustrated with this situation of, a person from North America, Western Europe, or Australia being sent to Venezuela for 7 weeks and coming back and saying, this is what Venezuela is like. But I was still
Right.
very interested in writing about place. So as I shifted to fiction, I found it really interesting to just dig deeper into place. In some, of course, I still have shortcomings in what I know about Seattle, but I have depth here in a way that I feel comfortable venturing some, uh, uh, you know, mixing metaphors here, but some bigger swings, and owning it, and just trying to dig into, I don't think of place as monument. Seattle isn't the Space Needle or the Fremont Troll. Seattle is, or any, any city, it's layers of micro interactions between people. It's the cultural elements that build the Space Needle. Those are the flowers, or the fruits of the roots that exist on, in all these other cultural moments. And so I tried to really write this grand story of place through a number of tighter domestic dramas in certain ways. And there are different storylines in this book, but one's a love story, one's a status story, one's a kind of a conflict land displacement story, and it's between neighbors. All takes place in the same neighborhood, all
Right.
around this giant boulder that keeps cropping up, with seagulls sitting on top of it. But yeah, in the end, it is still a story of place, and a deeper dive, multifaceted attempt to get my arms around where is this place that I was born, raised, and still live, and a place that is always getting new waves of people coming through, and
Right.
that I don't think necessarily has a great sense of itself and its past. And I wanted to write, again, a wider lens, engaging creation myth, for Seattle.
Yeah, that's certainly how I read it, and I wondered, sort of to maybe turn the conversation a little bit to craft. How did you keep? Did you write the stories? How did you approach this? So you have this Bruce, loose Bruce, who wants to open this pot shop in Seattle, wants to be the first person to open it. Did you write, or Sammy Hasagawa, who is the woman who opens the book, really, that we get to know, who wants her children's elementary school named in honor of her grandmother, who was
I would
yeah.
say the seagulls actually open the book, that
Oh, right. Yes.
represent,
Yeah.
to me, the
Right.
seagulls and the rock represent time before humans were here, because
Yeah.
we have to remember that most of the history of this land had no human beings on
Right.
it.
Right. Yeah.
um,
Fair
but
enough.
yeah, so I started with that story. I jumped back in time to the 1890s story, and then I added the 1970s, Ruth and Larry story, which that's the love story, I guess, would be the easiest way to define that one. It's Sammy's well, I'll just leave it at Sammy's mom and her suitor. Um, and I wrote them. I did not write any one section in one go. I would do two chapters from one timeline, then and they change POVs. So a Ruth chapter, a Larry chapter, a Bruce chapter, a Sammy chapter. One of the I'm sure there are advantages and disadvantages to playing that in either direction. But one thing, or to trying to write that either, in pieces or as a whole. But for me, it helped me to really kind of keep my energy up, and engagement with, okay, I'm just finally got this Sammy chapter done, and like, okay, now I'm on to Bruce, and I get to like keep revisiting friends, and that rejuvenated me to push through. And unlike other books that my other books, having such a broad field of characters, it's like there's just so much material to work with. I actually cut about 30,000 pages from this book. I had a different, like, 19th century timeline that wasn't really working. It was a little more slapsticky and just didn't really fit with the book. So I did write myself into, a few corners. But overall, this was much more, they talk about writers being architects or gardeners, or a pantser or a planner. You hear these different terms for, like, essentially, are you planning everything ahead of time, or are you going with the flow and seeing what happens? And
Right.
this was definitely much more of an attempt for me, whereas I'm uh used to have everything on 3x5 cards and planned ahead as much as time. I couldn't have conceived of all this story ahead of time. So it was really about, sitting in front of the keyboard and letting and trying to just channel ideas from somewhere beyond. And some of them worked and some of them didn't work, but it did lead me to a much more expansive novel in the end.
Did you write the novel that you wanted to read?
Yeah, I mean, I think to a degree, I always have to do that.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, I'm definitely and I'm fortunate too in that I have my own writing studio here in Seattle that um I'm able to pay my mortgage that way, and I work with different companies and do animation and video and anything you can apply a narrative to, essentially. So I'm in a fortunate situation with my novels and creative writing that um, I can go for it in ways that I want to, like. Yeah, I don't know that anybody else in the world was necessarily dying for a novel set in Lake City that took place at the
Right, right.
Fred Meyer Deli. A lot of it was, but it's just that, to me, is something that I find engaging, and humorous, and yeah, and just wanted to make an attempt at writing stuff that I would really like to see. Of course, as you become more and more of a professional, you have to temper your pure vision for something with what goes out in the world. I'm not, you know, uh, I would like people to engage with the book, obviously, and buy the book. But yeah, I'm trying to just have my interest, taste, and humor come through, and hopefully some other people will like that too.
Yeah, it definitely did come through, and I felt like I got to know who you were through the characters, through the innards of all the characters. A little bit of you, maybe here, a little bit of you. Why did you decide to call it Supersonic? Was that your original title for the book in your head?
Since a very early stage, yes. Ever since it made the leap from I had some different titles when it was a narrower, smaller story, but as soon as it made the jump to this more expansive book, I see Supersonic, not the basketball team, but the supersonic transport that the basketball team was named after, as a
Right.
central metaphor for the book. So um, I'll just give a very quick version, but the supersonic transport, JFK originally talked about it in the 60s, and it was gonna be the American Concorde. It was in the post-war era and American technology. We were gonna invent our way out, into the end of history. It was gonna change our relationship with time and space. We were gonna be flying to Tokyo for the evening, coming back the next day by lunch. And you know what? It didn't work out that way. And when the federal government canceled the funding in 1971, it cratered, we were the biggest company town in America at that point. It cratered the local economy in a way for a generation. That led to the infamous last person out of Seattle turn
Right.
out the lights. Um, and However, arguably, the engineering culture that was created around that laid the groundwork for the tech industry, which obviously changed everything. And so this central metaphor of reaching high, trying to do things differently, falling on your face, dusting yourself off, trying again, and maybe not getting what you wanted, but perhaps getting what you needed. I saw it as working, you know, that is very much a story of Seattle and Seattle's boom bust cycles, and thinking that we can do things differently, and whether it's operating systems or coffee or e-commerce, things that we didn't necessarily invent, but just trying to put our own spin on stuff. And I tried to arc that as the book, and then each character within the book follows a similar path
Right.
too. So that
Right.
there is a supersonic at the core there for you. So
When you're not when you're not working on a book or you're not doing your other work, what do you read? What kind of books? What's a good book for us to read that you enjoyed? And let me ask it this way: if we loved Supersonic, what should we read?
okay, if you love supersonic, what should well I've been originally when I started writing, I was much more interested in autofiction, but I have been increasingly interested in braided novels with multiple timelines. Since writing Supersonic, I was very inspired by Same Bed, Different Dreams by Ed Park, which was a runner-up for the Pulitzer last year, and is at one level a history of Korea, but North and South. But it's also about the creation of Tim Hortons donut shop in Canada, the history of the Buffalo Sabres hockey team, Odd Job, the bad guy from James Bond movies who threw his hat. It's the filming of the movie Friday the 13th. There's a lot of stuff going on there. It just really inspired me on again on like what the novel can be and why the novel is so
Yeah.
resilient in a time with um, so much other so many other forms of entertainment that are often easier to digest. There's just that I found that really inspirational. um uh Other similar books to that, a big influence, Jonathan Evison, Pacific Northwest writer, is my good friend and also my mentor. His books, West of Here and Small World. West of Here was a massive influence a number of years back when I read it, and is a fictional version of Port Angeles and the creation of that place. Um, uh, uh, Jennifer Egan. Here comes the Goon Squad, or welcome. Here comes the Goon Squad. I was just referred to as Goon Squad, but
Hmm.
that was uh, multimodal, and different POVs, timelines. inspiring book. Cloud Atlas, David Mitchell. And then I just read, I botched the title on this one too, Alvaro and Enrique. Um, you dreamed of empires, which is
Oh, right.
an alt history of the taking of Tenochtitlan, the arrival of the Spanish, and uh, Montezuma's welcoming of them. And it just I have a I have a master's in Latin American history, or Latin American studies, I should say, within which I studied a lot of Latin American history, and it was an intriguing spin on sort of the standard story that you get in studying, you know. Your down the middle take on history. So I'm interested in people doing things differently. I think anybody taking making an attempt at doing things differently in a fresh way. I'm just I don't know. I'm impressed by anybody who writes a novel. Period.
Yeah, right, indeed. Well, Thomas, we're impressed too by people who write novels, and I want to just really thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for your new book, Supersonic, which I thoroughly enjoyed, and I look forward to your next work.
Well, thank you so much, and it's an honor to be on the show, and thank you for all that you have done for books in Seattle and beyond. And maybe I should have written a Nancy Pearl storyline in this story to Seattle. Maybe there'll be a
Well,
an
let's do
iconic
it.
librarian in the next one. We'll see what happens. So,
I hope so. Okay, thank you so much.
thank you so
Bye.
much. Have a wonderful day.